So left and right are pretty old terms, but they're not that old in terms of the course of human history. It really just goes back to the French Revolution, when in 1789, the President's Assembly was split up into two sides. The left being those who were in support of the revolution, and the right being those who were in support of the king or the monarchy. And the way that this is basically divided, the basic division, is that there are those who are on the left who are the supporters of the movement, and those who are on the right who are the supporters of order. Okay, and so you have movement and you have order. Now, political scientists have studied this dynamic since then, obviously quite a lot, and come to the conclusion that humans are more or less basically split into these main types of preferences. This sort of preference for order and preference for chaos. You can view it as order and chaos, respectively. There's a few problems with this. There's a few problems with this formulation of human politics. And if we're going to move past a lot of the partisan divides that shape our current discourse and try to move into a more productive politics where there's not just constant infighting and constantly going at each other's throats and really tearing down our capacity to solve real problems, we need to figure out whether or not this divide is something that's insurmountable and what we might be able to do about it. There are two reasons why this left and right divide doesn't really make sense, in my opinion. And that is, one, a concept I call policy bundling. That is, if you're in either the left or the right camp in any political party or ideology or given group, you are basically signing up for a suite of policies that all go together, or apparently go together, but don't necessarily logically make sense for them to be together. The classic example I like to give of this is that if you're a Republican here in the United States, that means that you are in favor of both low taxes and against abortion. Now, there's no reason logically that those two things would be correlated whatsoever, but for some reason, because of the way that these policy bundles are put together and assigned to these more fundamental groups, which are left and right, over time, the entire population sort of lines up along these very partisan lines. So part of the chaos that you're seeing right now is actually the fact that this process of normalization, of segmentation into these major political camps has been going on here in the United States for, I don't know, give or take 250 years now. And what that does over time is it makes it so that there are basically these two sides which are grouped together largely, but they're still pretty incoherent in terms of what they actually believe and in terms of whether or not the people that are on one side even agree with the people who are also in that camp. But of course, because the issues tend to get played up and they tend to get polarized for various political and financial reasons over time, what ends up happening is that everybody who's pro-abortion ends up on one side and everyone who's anti-abortion ends up on the other side. And there's over time less and less crossover, fewer and fewer people who are able to go between sides or would be willing to switch sides on a given topic. Now, the other main reason this doesn't work, the other main reason why left and right doesn't really make any sense, in my opinion, is environmental variance. If you take it for granted that there are these fundamental human dispositions and that some people are more disposed to being pro-order and some people are more disposed to being pro-chaos when we're talking about entropy and structures, then one of the problems with that is that if people are immobile, that is, they're refusing to move or to adjust or to be adaptable, to switch sides or slightly adjust their orientation given the changing circumstances, well then when the environment changes and when the appropriate policy is more towards change, or when the appropriate policy is more towards conservation, then what's going to happen is that those people and those policy proposals aren't going to be fit with the times, because of course the best political orientation is always the one that's the most practical. That is, the one that will actually get what you need done. If you're too ossified in your ways and you're too stuck in one side or the other, one orientation, an orientation towards change, constant revolution, the never-ending overthrow of the old orders, or on the other hand, you're too ossified in terms of wanting to keep things the same, wanting things not to change, wanting to preserve the old order, etc., well then you're not going to be very adaptable and you're not going to be very flexible when circumstances change and when environments change. And so it's very important, if you want to have a practical politics, if you want to have a politics that actually gets things done, that actually solves problems.
Which is in theory what we're supposed to be doing in the political realm.
Of course, disagreement is part of the natural process, and you need to have people disagreeing in order to hash out how to solve these problems best and to decide on what the community wants. And people should be putting forward vigorous defenses of their positions and using their words and using argumentation and so forth to try to make the case for their side. But overall, if you become too rigid, you're not going to be fit with the times. And there are instances of this happening throughout all of human civilization, where a society becomes either too rigid or too obsessed with revolution, and they either, one, don't adjust to the times because they don't want to change anything, and so they end up getting taken out by somebody else, or two, they change things too fast, and so you end up with a disaster situation, lots of people dead, lots of information, lots of knowledge, artwork, great literature, etc. lost, because people are so stuck in the frenzy of the revolution and the change that will come and the utopia that they're going to bring about, that they forget that there are some old things that can't just be haphazardly thrown away. Those are my two problems. Those are basically the two fundamental problems I have with the whole left and right dynamic. These are basically the two main issues, which is policy bundles and environmental variance. You have to figure out how to unbundle policy, and you have to figure out how to adapt appropriately, not one way or the other, but appropriately to the changing environment. All right, so let's talk about solutions. Solution one is unbundle policy. I've already mentioned this in this video. There are these policy bundles, they need to be unbundled. You can think of this in terms of the Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, for example. So trying to develop more relationships and promote more people who are similar to Tulsi Gabbard, who maybe they belong for practical reasons into one party or the other, but in general, they have views that could go either way. And so it's this mixed bag of views that allows them to appeal to different constituent groups, to have a very wide base without necessarily alienating a lot of other people. And furthermore, it's getting to this root problem of the bundled policy issue, right? So someone like Tulsi is able to adopt different positions, and even though most of her positions might be more aligned with the Democrats, she's getting some positions, some policy positions, that is, from the Republicans. And so through that, you actually have the sense that when you're talking to her, or when you're speaking with her, or when you're seeing her speak in public, you're actually dealing with a thinking person, somebody who's not ideologically rigid, and who's capable of assessing each individual issue based on their own values and their own way of thinking about things. And so the policies need to be unbundled, and you need to start finding and seeking out, and we collectively need to start promoting people who are interested in unbundling policies rather than adopting broad stroke ideologies. And this ties into my second solution, which is reimagining and reinvigorating the polity. And this second part is a large part of what we're doing here on this channel. I would say that both of these solutions, both the unbundling and the reimagining of the polity, are part of the project for the future of politics. But moving beyond left and right is going to require also reimagining and reinvigorating the polity. What does this mean exactly? First of all, it means getting the scale and the definition of problems correct. So if you don't have the right proper scale, and you don't have the proper definition of the problems that you're trying to solve, well then really you're just really in control of someone else, or you're attempting to do something that might be impossible. So you need to have the right scale, and you need to also have the right problems that you're trying to solve. And so a lot of what reimagining the polity looks like is something like a return to localism, right? Or an abandonment of globalism, or an abandonment of blind cosmopolitanism, right? This notion that the polity itself is always something that has to be grounded in a real place with real people in a real community. And so talking about politics just generally in the abstract is not really a useful or practical way to approach solving actual problems. And so the more you can move away from that kind of discourse and move into the frame of mind of, okay, we're going to be talking about specific things with specific people in a particular group that we're in a particular set of problems that they have that we're trying to solve, the more you can start to get to a place where the discussion is more reasonable, and again, we're trying to solve problems here, more practical. The second component of this is to decide what matters. One of the problems that I think a lot of us are dealing with just in this age is the widespread lack of meaning, lack of alienation, the sense-making problem itself, the fact that people can't really decide what makes sense, what doesn't, what's right, what's wrong, how we should go about living our lives, what it means to be a human, etc. All of this is tied into this inability to decide what actually matters, right? And so in the spirit of moving away from these vague abstractions and moving down into concrete instantiations, real problems, real people, real particularity in the world, we need to also decide what our priorities are and what actually matters. Because having a politics where you're just talking about these vague generic ideals like equality, like liberty, like freedom, etc., can be more of a distraction than it is a rallying cry or something that will actually move us into a better place. It's much better, in my opinion, to prioritize what your actual values are, whether that's on the level of an individual or a family or a community or a town or even a state or a nation. You need to decide what actually matters. And so getting to the core of reimagining and reinvigorating the polity is going to involve also a reprioritization and an actual ordering of what's actually important to us. And until we do those things, it's going to be hard to move past any of these ideological divides. So those are my thoughts on the left and right divide and how we can start to move past it. Let me know what you think. I'll see you next time.